Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning. I speak to you today on the last day of May 2020. It's been an extraordinary week. Several extraordinary events have happened. Today we'll talk about the view from viruses to the universe, from the mundane to the spiritual. The first thing is that this week over 100,000 American lives were lost to the COVID virus. This is unbelievable in a country that has unequaled health care, resources, all the modern conveniences. And yet, within 3 months, we've lost 100,000 American lives. And this is not just a statistic. Everyone is a human being that had a family and friends, and they passed. These human lives are a concern to us because we are in an era that is unprecedented. In California, we are fortunate because our governor, Gavin Newsom, has ordered a stay-at-home directive early on, and so the statistics in California has been relatively good. Our infection rate and death rate has been relatively low and steady. And I want to congratulate the members of the BTSD for observing the stay-at-home orders. And so at this time, there are no infections that we're aware of. And it's because this works. By isolating ourselves, keeping away from others, we can stay away from being infected. There's no known cure or medicine or way to treat this virus. And yet we see in other parts of the country, people are flaunting their independence by congregating in places. So we know that this isolation works, and I'm happy that we are able to continue that. So this is a terrible situation, but we've talked about shifting our views. So how might we see this from a different perspective? The COVID virus brings the reality of death to our everyday modern life. And 100 years ago, death was a little more common in that during the month of May, we visit Imperial Valley and the old pioneer grave in Calexico. And there we see small graves of infants, of children who died. And this was not uncommon in the early 20th century. But now in the 21st century, we have all these modern medical benefits. And so this is unusual. And yet this COVID virus has now brought death to our everyday reality. So the difference here is that it brings religion, spirituality to our attention. In Shindan's writings, he says that our birth in the pure realm can actually be a spiritual awakening. And the emphasis is about our present life, not so much the afterlife, because we're assured that once we pass on, we return to our original nature. And it's said that the pure realm is actually empty, because what happens is we come back here to the world of samsara to help others become awake. In the afterlife, we're accepted just as we are, unlike some other religions that put an emphasis on the afterlife, and that this present life is just a means to determine our afterlife in the eternity. And we think about whether we go to heaven or hell. But in Shin Buddhism, all are accepted just as we are. So what is the spiritual awakening? There are several explanations. One might be that we awaken to the reality that all is spiritual. What does that mean? We go from the mundane, the physical world, to the spiritual realm. And it's difficult to explain this because we're describing an experience. This experience of being isolated means that we're unable to come to the temple and join together with others. Fortunately, many of us have a home altar or obutsudan, as you see here. And so we have what is present at our temple. And we can go to it, bow, burn incense, even chant, say the Nembutsu. And that is what we have at all times, even if we don't have a home obutsudan. We have the term Namo Amida Butsu or Namandabs. And this is our way of shifting our focus again from the mundane to the spiritual, this shift from please to thank you, and you've heard me speak a lot about that. So how does this ritual of making something physical help us? think of an issue that concerns you, something that's a challenge. Now think of that. And think of how it might challenge your present view or your values. And it might be a barrier. So to symbolize that physically, put out your hand and hide my face representing that barrier, so that you can't see it. When Shinran talks about a crosswise shift, crosswise leap, this is what he means. When we go sideways, what happens? Our barrier is reduced, and we see this problem from a different perspective. And this is what Namandavs can do. It reminds us that we can shift our view to see something from a different way. It is still a problem, but we have a different perspective of it. Rather than coming to it from a negative view that I'm a victim, I can't do anything, we can shift our view to see it as a problem, or perhaps from a view that we can do something. And for an example, this COVID virus is a problem, and yet it brings us closer to the spiritual view of life. Now, for a second example, we have these riots happening now in Minnesota and elsewhere, protesting the killing of George Floyd, a black man killed by 4 policemen, or one man who kept his knee on his neck for 8 minutes until he passed away. Now, it took days for these police to be charged, and of course there were these protests, peaceful protests, against this injustice. But now there are riots all over America in several cities, and it has turned to violence. And these riots do not represent the real feelings of those who started silent and peaceful protests. And this response is violence against violence, and it doesn't work. And this topic, of course, is very complex. So how do we as Buddhists see this? We don't look at things as just saying, well, let's just hope and pray. We know that we can alter the future. And with our meditation and insight, we can shift the way we see things, just from this completely negative point of view on violence or something with a little positive feeling. And we, many of us who are people of color, can see this as a personal experience. Recently, people have been abused and bullied, saying that Asians or Chinese who brought this virus in from China. Now we can respond in several ways. We can be violent or we can be very upset. Of course it is upsetting. But then if we came at this from a different point of view, we could either not respond or respond in a way that says, I'm sorry you feel that way. You must be hurting. Now this doesn't affect that other person so much as it helps us in our maturity, in our growth process. So we don't expect that other person to change, but just by responding this way, we can see that we're growing. We can see things another way and come back with a positive comment. We could see that other person who's abusing us as a junior high school child, because that's where this hurt comes from. That's where these replies come from. And with that, let that negative insult go. The third event I speak of is the space shuttle. SpaceX, Elon Musk's spacecraft that brought 2 astronauts into space. It's a great human accomplishment, the teamwork required. The real difficult task of putting this spacecraft and 2 humans into space. Now, what astronauts always seem to say when they're up in space and looking back on the Earth is that how tiny and insignificant they feel. They feel humble. And they say that they see no borders. They see how fragile the Earth is. One comment that an astronaut made was that looking down at the Earth and the atmosphere, he likened it to an onion, and the atmosphere being as thin as the outer skin of an onion, protecting the Earth. And so that view of Earth gives us the thought of really taking care of this planet. Now, this brings us to the original question of the mundane to the spiritual. This human accomplishment of bringing humans into space, to the moon and elsewhere, brings us reality. That this human accomplishment allows us to see that we are one Earth, and that this tiny planet is spinning around a sun. And this sun represents one star that is in a galaxy called the Milky Way, and that there are billions of stars in the galaxy. That's something I've seen in the Milky Way. I can kind of get a head around that. But then we're told that there are billions of galaxies. That's something that's very difficult for me to really comprehend. So how did we get here at this time and at this place? Is it that our life on this planet is just a coincidence? Or is it a spiritual reality? And this is what we are waking up to. That in this vast universe, we humans are here at a time when we're able to see this planet and to see our place in the universe. To me, this is a spiritual reality. And so to discuss this further, I invite you to our Buddhism 1, 2, 3 class held on Wednesdays. This next Wednesdays, we will be discussing the topic of Amida Buddha, and the following 2 Wednesdays, the Nembutsu. Also, I've been invited to speak on the online seminar of the BCA Center for Buddhist Education seminar on Saturday, June 27th. The title of my talk will be Man's Search for Meaning. And so we'll talk about some of the things we touched on today a little further. And so I ask you, be safe, stay at home. We're saving others and ourselves from this virus. And find something to say thank you toward every day, this shift from please to thank you. Namandas is that key that will remind us that in any situation we can take a different view, a view that connects us with that other side. And so please join me in expressing our deepest appreciation for being on this planet at this time and place in history. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.